So thank you all for joining us today. My name is Sarah Bostic, and I'm the Sustainable Agriculture Extension Agent with the University of Florida in both Sarasota and DeSoto counties. This is a class that I taught about a year ago, and I'm really excited to be offering it again virtually so that folks from further afield can attend. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. We have an hour together today, and the way we're going to do questions and answers is because this whole virtual thing makes interaction a little bit, just a little bit different. If you have questions, and please ask questions as we go along, type those questions into the chat box. You should see a little symbol at the bottom of your screen that looks like a little text box, and underneath it the word chat. Just tap on that and then type your questions into the chat box. And my fantastic co-worker Kevin is going to be moderating that chat box. So Kevin just gave you the thumbs up. Every 10 minutes or so, I will stop and ask Kevin for the questions that have come through. And then we'll just work through questions in that way. Sound good? And any questions that I don't get to answering or don't have a good answer for during this webinar, I will send a follow-up email when the webinar is done, or by tomorrow anyway, probably not today, but tomorrow with some follow-up information. So you're gonna see what's on your screen change, and I'm gonna pull up a presentation. There we go. Okay. So first, just to give you a little bit of background on who I am, I actually have a background in farming. I farmed for 16 years, and through that mix, I also have spent more than 10 years working in agriculture education, both on the marketing and the production side. So being able to navigate food labels and food claims is something that I've had to get pretty proficient at. I also spent a few years long ago creating and managing a really local food distribution company, and that was another time in my life where I had to learn even more about how food labeling works. And for the last year and a half, I have been agriculture agent in Sarasota County. In the last 6 months, I've also been covering an interim for DeSoto County, right next door. So, as a starting point, here's the big question, right? There's so many food labels and food claims and things that are written on packaging of food, but who regulates all of those claims? And of course, the really simple and non-informative answer is that it depends. So it depends, right? So it really depends on what category of food or product that we're putting on or in our bodies we're talking about. So everything that's in these pictures is regulated by some entity or has some law regarding what kind of claims you can make about it. So I'm going to start by talking about the kinds of claims and food labels that you'll find on packaged food, and the kinds of labels and claims that are regulated in some way by the federal government. So there's really two different branches of our government that regulate the kinds of labels and claims that you see on food and on food advertisement in this country. And one branch of government is the Food and Drug Administration. We usually call them the FDA. And the FDA has been around for quite a while, and it was inspired by a lot of early advertisements in this country of things like snake oil, liniment, and other very dubious food and medicinal labeling and claims that were being made. This is, like you can see in this picture, this was a product that folks were claiming cured everything from frost bites to sore throats, and it had, theoretically had snake oil in it. So that's some of the origin of why the federal government actually started to regulate some of what we put on and in our bodies. So the FDA really regulates just 3 different kinds of claims. All the rest of the federally regulated claims and labels that you see on food fall under the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So just super quickly, I'm going to take you through the FDA claims. So anything that's regulated by the FDA, that Food and Drug Administration, basically falls into some sort of claim that the company is making about how it will impact your health, right? So something like the nutrient contents, so that it's low fat or contains X number of calories, some sort of health claim, like you can see this one on your screen, 3 grams of soluble fiber, blah, blah, blah. In a diet low in saturated fat and cholesterol may reduce the risk of heart disease, right? That's the kind of claim that the FDA covers. If you want to really dive deep into how those kinds of food claims are regulated, there is a 132-page food labeling guide, all that regulates what people can write on packaging. It's not the most engaging. If you have trouble sleeping, I recommend it. So the USDA is more of what we think about in terms, USDA regulated food labeling is more what we think about in terms of this kinds of stamps that you see on packaging, like certified or have some sort of stamp on it. And there's the bulk of the regulation that happens in USDA as it relates to food claims happens under the branch of the USDA called the Food Safety and Inspection Service. And that's the branch of our federal government that inspects and regulates meat, poultry, and processed egg products that are meant for the distribution, meant for human consumption. There's a whole other branch that regulates things that are meant for animal consumption, but for human consumption, this is the group that does it. It also, USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service is also the branch that verifies compliance with some of the Humane Methods Compliance Act. So the kinds of stamps that you see associated with that are those blurry little stamps that you can see on the bottom left of your screen. That stamp is going to be on any package of meat or egg product that you purchase in somewhere like a grocery store in this country. If it was produced in the United States, it has to have that stamp, which means that a food safety inspector actually was there when that was processed. So then the USDA, and so let me back up one step. That branch of the USDA, the Food Safety and Inspection Service, is completely focused in on food safety. This is the inspection service that makes sure that we don't have major food safety outbreaks. There's another branch within the USDA that is responsible for another set of stamps that we sometimes see on meat packaging, that USDA Prime, Choice, or Select stamps. And that has nothing to do with food safety or overall quality of that product. It's simply based on a matrix. And the higher the animal or the beef product tests on that matrix, the higher the level of stamp it gets. So the maturity of the animal. Younger animals are on this matrix more valuable than older animals. The amount of marbling, where that marbling happens, all of that goes into these USDA Prime, Choice, or Select labels. So it doesn't actually have anything really to do with food safety or quality. It's much more just about this matrix. And that matrix has actually changed over time. So if you're interested in learning more about beef grading, which is actually, it's a subject that I never thought I would be fascinated by, but once I started learning about it, it actually is pretty fascinating. There's a link down there at the bottom of your screen to a Texas A&M publication all about how beef is graded in this country. So this is really, this is another really big USDA certified like stamp that you might see on some of your food labels. And actually I see there's a lot of chat popping up. Kevin, are there questions that I should go ahead and address?
There's been one question that came in so far. We've asked folks to let us know where they're from as well. So that might be the chat you're seeing in there. We've got somebody from Switzerland if you're interested.
Oh, fun.
But the question, if you want to address that came in was regarding pharma industry. And it was how strong is the pharma industry lobby with the FDA? And then a follow-up, I'm not so sure about their independence, if you will.
That's a really great question, and that's a hard one to answer. And there's certainly very substantial lobbying that happens from all sorts of different farm industries, as well as as well as allied industries within agriculture. So that is certainly a part of that's certainly a part of things. Lobbying happens across all industries, and farming is not an exception to that.
Yeah, Sarah, you might have addressed that. You might not have, I might not have spoken clearly enough. That was actually pharma industry, like big pharma,
Oh, pharma,
pharmaceuticals.
PH farm, yes.
Right.
That's a really good question. Yes, there's lots of that for sure. Yep. Yep. Lobbying makes the world go round. So, thank you for that clarification. So that's a very different question. So USDA certified organic is another symbol that you see on a lot of food, and it's a really big growing industry in this country. It's actually the fastest growing sector of our food economy is food that has that USDA organic stamp. So there's this whole USDA organic thing can get really confusing. So it actually was not until 2002 that the USDA became basically the owner of organic in this country. Prior to that, the federal government actually was not involved in regulating what organic means in this country. So we didn't actually have a standard across the board. But as of 2002, we all operate now under the same set of standards. So for packaged processed foods, there's different ways you might see this label. Anything that's labeled as 100% organic and has that USDA organic stamp on it means that everything that was in that package is USDA certified organic. Anything that has the word organic, but not the 100% part of that word and the USDA organic stamp means that at least 95% of everything that's in there is certified organic. And then anything that is labeled simply with made with organic ingredients means that at least 70% of what's in there by volume, by weight, is certified organic. And then any kind of packaged food that has less than 70% can't even use that little phrase of made with organic ingredients. But if you read labels, you sometimes see that packaged product actually does contain some specific organic ingredients. So with things like fresh produce or meat or dairy or egg products that are not packaged and processed into something else, they either are certified organic or they're not. You can't have a 70% certified organic eggplant, for example. It is simply a certified organic eggplant or it's not. So let me just tell you so I actually teach a 6-hour version of organic certification for farmers and ranchers because there's so many rules and so many little nuances and layers and things to learn. So, clearly this slide does not take into consideration all 6 hours worth of material that I usually try to convey to farmers and ranchers that are interested. But this gives you kind of the basics of what is expected of certified organic in our country. For crops, so we're talking about anything that's a fruit or a vegetable or a grain. A certified organic crop has to be grown on land where no prohibited materials were applied to that land for at least 3 years prior to harvest. And so prohibited materials, basically what that means is any sort of synthetic chemicals. That's generally what that means. There's a lot more to it, but that's kind of the easiest way to boil it down. Folks that are producing crops also have to prove that they are actively improving or maintaining soil health. It is not allowable under any circumstances to use genetically modified organisms, sewage sludge, which is the leftovers after sewage treatment plants finish treating what goes through our sewage system, and no use of irradiation. There's a very small section of synthetic chemicals that are allowed, but it's mostly stabilizers within natural chemicals that are used so that those naturally derived chemicals don't go bad in the bottle. And then you have to actually document your pest, disease, and weed prevention strategies before using any sort of approved products for control. There's a manure waiting period, meaning that you can't actually use manure on fields for a certain number of months prior to harvesting something. And that's for food safety purposes, because there is a lot of manure used on organic farms. It's a really great way to feed back into the soil. But to make sure that it doesn't become a food safety issue, you have to wait a few months before you can harvest anything. And then all of your seed also has to be from organic or untreated seed and plant stock. And then the livestock rules have to follow all the same rules as the crop producers. And so in the livestock world, the crop, for the most part, is pasture, wherever those animals are grazing. They have to follow all those same crop rules. And then those animals have to be under continuous organic management, starting at different moments in life. Most of them, it's actually while they're still in utero, while they're still inside of their mother's uterus. Ruminants, and ruminants are animals like goats and cows, other types of animals that have like a 4-chambered fermentation type stomach. They can't be restricted from pasture. They have to have access to pasture. Can't use any growth promoting drugs, antibiotics, or I can't ever say this word, parasiticides on livestock. No slaughter byproducts from mammals or poultry. Even if it means you have to take your animals out of organic certification, if they're sick, you have to treat them. There's a really strong element of humane treatment that's built into the organic standards. And then, but you also can't administer any kind of drugs unless your animal is sick and a vet confirms that they are sick. And then under no circumstances is total confinement prohibited. So that's the basic rules on USDA certified organic. So I want to also show you how confusing this whole organic thing is, and how confusing food labeling is in general. And I'm guessing that all of you have seen packaging that looks like this. This is a package of peppers, of just regular old like red bell peppers. You can see a lot of information on here that appears to be conflicting, right? You can see that this is a product of Mexico, but the address of this farm business is in Ontario, Canada, but it's certified by the USDA, the US Department of Agriculture, and the third-party certifier, because all organic certification in this country happens through a third-party certifier, not directly through USDA inspectors, but through a third party. And in this case, this particular third-party certifier is based out of San Diego, California. And then I purchased this product in Florida from a German-owned grocery store, right? That is a lot of countries, a lot of claims, a lot of addresses. That's really confusing, right? But this is a pretty typical example of how incredibly complex our food system has gotten. And this is, from pure legality standpoints, this is a perfectly legitimate food product in our country. But it really, I think, does a good job of highlighting how confusing it is to look at labels and understand what you're looking at. And I can pause there if there's questions, Kevin.
We do have a question that came in, Sarah. It was paraphrasing here. Many foods long ago were modified from their original form via hybridization, genetic modification, and so on. So is there any certification that will tell you if a food or a grain is original in its nature?
Oh, that's such a good question. I've actually never heard that question asked in that direction. Next, I'm actually going to show you something that's kind of the flip version of that question. I believe that there are a handful of certifications that are out there that are like a certified heirloom variety. That's generally what we're talking about when we're talking about really old, kind of like quote unquote original varieties of of crops, we're generally talking about heirlooms. And those are simply just old, really genetically stable food types. And when I say genetically stable, I mean just like, natural, either wind or pollinator, like bees pollinated the crop sort of thing, like that kind of just natural genetic stability. There's a really great organization that I've overlapped with for many years called Slow Food International, and they maintain a really, really amazing list of really old heirloom varieties of crops and heritage breeds of animals across the world, including in this country. That's a great source to go to find some really old original varieties of things from our country, as well as from other parts of the world. And then let me give you the flip side of that as well. So this is more the question that I tend to get. So it was really neat to have that question asked kind of in the other direction. So a lot of people ask, how do I know that if a food that I'm looking at in the grocery store was genetically modified? Well, as of a little over a year and a half ago, the U.S. government, the federal government, passed a law that is now in motion. And so any food product in our country should now be, any food product in our country that is made with any sort of food that was genetically modified, also known as bioengineered or GMO or GM, should have this label on it now that you can see up there on your screen. It's fairly slowly being rolled in, and I'm going to send you a link via email tomorrow, where you can go and learn more about this, because it's still not super well known. The labels are really small where they are landing on packaging, and there's actually a much smaller list than you might guess of foods, of genetically modified foods that are making it into just regular commercially available foods in our country. It's a relatively short list. There's some things on there that you would never guess would end up on that list, and some other things that make more sense. One that really surprised me when I first learned about it was that papaya now is one of the genetically modified food crops, and it's in order to regulate a particular virus in that plant that really was devastating the papaya industry. So who knew that you now can buy a genetically modified papaya? Okay, so that's really it in terms of federal regulations, where you can actually have a stamp, like a claim, a stamp for most of the products that you see on grocery store shelves in this country. So I'm going to take you next through this. This is one of the neatest, most helpful guide to label claims on animal products that I have ever stumbled across. And I stumbled across this a few years ago when I was actually working in North and South Carolina for a great little nonprofit. I was doing a lot of consulting work with smaller scale farmers, and they were trying to figure out what kinds of, how to label their products really well for marketing purposes. And this guide, which you can find, just do a Google search for quick guide to common label claims. It should pop right up. This is put together by a whole collaboration of universities in North Carolina, and it's excellent. So you're not going to be able to see it super well on my computer screen, but I want you to be able to see it. I want you to be able to see it so that you know how useful it is. So this is what one side of this really handy handout that you can actually print right off their website looks like. And it goes through all the different kinds of claims. And can you actually see the very top of that screen? Oops, sorry. Or do I have a bar in the way of it? Can you read the top section of that, Kevin?
Sure, with the darker tan line?
Yes.
The field headers? Yeah, that's in
great.
view.
I can't see them, but I'm glad you can. This is just a really simple way to understand different claims that you might see on animal products. And they're organized in these very distinct categories that you can see right there on your screen. And I'm going to go through a few of these. So these claims basically fall into one of three categories or characteristics about how the claim is being made. One is about how the animal was actually raised. What were its conditions while it was being raised on the farm that it was living on. The second category is what that animal ate during its lifetime. And the third was how it was processed, right? So I think that where so much confusion comes in on the meat side is that we assume that a lot of these claims kind of cover all three of these categories, whereas most of them actually don't. So here's, this is just a chunk from the top of that. And you can see with these first four claims right here, no added hormones, raised without antibiotics, all natural, and grass-fed. Each of those actually only covers one category of those three: raised, ate, and processed, right? And the one I think that surprises people the most is that claim called all natural. We see that claim of all natural all the time on meat. You go to any grocery store and there's almost inevitably a section of that meat section that's the all natural section, right? So the absolute only thing that all natural refers to is how that animal was processed. It doesn't relate whatsoever to how that animal was raised or what it ate while it was alive. And so really all it means is there's a layer of regulation about how it was processed and the additives that were put on that product before it went off to the grocery store. That's it. And so that's the one that usually surprises people the most. So I'm guessing you also see on this screen the words that are in red under each of these categories, the unverified claim. So let's take a look at what this means. There's three categories on this chart. It's unverified claim, third-party verified claim, and variable claim. So a third-party verified claim, that means that a third-party agent of some sort, not the one that actually holds the stamp, but a third party that it doesn't get lobbied. They are actually auditing whatever it is that claim is, and they're verifying the claim against a published set of protocols. So examples of a third-party verified claim is that USDA certified organic stamp and animal welfare approved. Those are actually two of the only third-party verified food claims that we have in this country, interestingly enough. And so one way to think about a third-party verified claim is basically like the IRS are doing our taxes every year. That's that kind of audit. If you're a business and you get audited by the IRS, that's what a third-party agency audit is like. They do a deep dive into your business to make sure that what you are doing is what you say you're doing and what you're claiming to do. And then there's variable claims. So a third-party variable claims are still looked at by a third-party agency, but they're verifying, not auditing. And then they're verifying the claim against a published set of guidance, not protocols. So there is still oversight, there is still a published set of information, but each of those things are simply one step bumped down from the stringency of a third-party verified claim. So something that falls into that variable claim category is the claim of non-GMO. We can go into a bit about why non-GMO currently sits in that variable claim category in a little bit. And then there's the unverified claims. And this is really where the bulk of the food claims that you see that are not regulated by the FDA are going to fall on food packaging. You can use them without a third-party verification. And this is one of those things where if you get reported to the USDA for making a claim like this, you might get inspected, but there's no preemptive set of protocols or guidance, and there's no third-party verification. So examples are things like all natural, grass-fed, raised without antibiotics. there any questions about that? I know it's kind of hard to see where the distinction is between things. But any questions, Kevin?
Just kind of a wrap up on that one. Is there a listing anywhere that would show you all the companies that meet such a verified claim, or a website that would give you that information?
That's a great question. For USDA organic, there is. It's called the Organic Integrity Database. When I'm in this mode, I can't actually type into the chat. Kevin, do you mind typing Organic Integrity Database into that chat box? And then I'll also send that information out via email. So the Organic Integrity Database is a USDA maintained and weekly updated database of every single certified organic farm, processor, and distributor in this country. It's a really clunky website, but if you can figure out how to navigate it, it opens the door up to phenomenal amounts of information. And you can even figure out how long a particular entity has been certified organic. You can see exactly what products they produce, where they're located, who their third-party certifier is, all sorts of things about them. And then in terms of animal welfare approved, I believe that they also have a publicly accessible list. But I am not 100% sure about that. I can find out.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so if you weren't already confused, we're going to move on to eggs. Eggs are really confusing. And so I also want to point out that everything that we've talked about so far is much more specific to the kinds of foods that you see in grocery stores than the kinds of foods that you would see at a farmer's market, for example. Although the same rules exist, you're less likely to see all sorts of stamps on a product at a farmer's market than you are at a grocery store. So eggs. Okay, so the USDA also regulates claims on eggs. They are not a third-party audited claim. Okay, so there's this whole world of eggs is it's a special one. So one of the things that you see oftentimes on grocery store eggs is the claim of cage-free. And sorry, there is so much text on this screen. I just wanted you to actually see the exact text as it comes right off of the regulations on the USDA's website. So eggs that are labeled as cage-free are laid by hens that were able to roam both vertically and horizontally in indoor houses. They also have to have access to fresh food and water, and cage-free systems vary from farm to farm, and they can include multi-tier aviaries. So what that means is they're not necessarily scratching around outside in the farmyard. They may be in a building that's 10 stories high and running around in their outside of cages. They have to be large enough that hens can exhibit some of their natural behaviors. They have to have perches and nests, have to have access to litter, protection from predators and things like that. Free range is basically the same set of information as cage-free, plus they have to have continuous access to outdoors during their laying cycle. The outdoor area may be fenced and or covered with netting-like material. So the key part to this is they have to have continuous access to outdoors during their laying cycle, which means that when they're not in their laying cycle, they don't have to have any access at all to the outdoors. And there's also no stipulation in here about how much access they have, how they access the outdoors, how large their outdoor area is. And so for the most part, in grocery store eggs, when you see that free range label, the chickens were raised up until the point of their laying cycle, when they start laying, totally indoors. They've never seen the outdoors, and so they're actually scared to go outside. So just because they have access to go outside during their laying cycle doesn't mean that they do. It just means that they they have to have access to it. And the outdoor area is usually a cement pad or something of that nature. So, you know, it's certainly a life improvement over a life in a cage, but it's still often not what people think they're buying. You know, which is not to say that it's a bad product. It's simply just often not what people think they're buying when they see that free range label. So there's other common claims that you see on egg cartons. One is vegetarian feed or vegetarian fed. And all that means is that there's no animal byproducts in the feed that the animals were getting, or in the feed that those chickens were getting. Chickens actually are not vegetarians. A chicken naturally is an omnivore. They eat lots of insects. They'll even eat small rodents, things like that, if they can catch them. So vegetarian feed simply means that there's no animal byproducts in their feed. And then the local or locally produced is an interesting one. The federal government actually has a definition for the purpose of eggs about what local means. And it's not the one you might think it is. So from a federally defined standpoint, local means eggs that were from a flock of chickens located less than 400 miles from the processing facility, or are within the state in which the eggs originated from and were processed in. So local from that standpoint does not necessarily mean the same kind of local that you would use when you're talking about something being local. So does that mean that when you go to the farmer's market and someone says that they're selling their own locally produced eggs, that they are potentially from 400 miles away? It's very, very, very unlikely. Generally, when a local producer selling at a farmer's market says that they are local, they're probably from within 50 miles of where that farmer's market is happening. But just wanted to put that out there because we actually do have a federally defined version of local as it relates to eggs. And then another one that you might see is antibiotic free. And it's actually not legal to provide chickens with antibiotics in this country. And so that's kind of a moot point label. All eggs are antibiotic free. So let's see. Okay. And then there's also plenty of claims that you will see on egg cartons that are not regulated by the USDA. And egg cartons tend to be a really, really busy thing. I get really overwhelmed looking at egg cartons. My eyes start to cross because they just tend to have so much information on them. But this is a good example of an egg carton that has some claims on it that are not regulated by the USDA. One of which is pasture raised. So pasture raised, there actually is a standard for pasture raised. It's just not a federal standard. Pasture raised, by definition, is a minimum, each bird has a minimum of 108 square feet on pasture, so actually outside and allowed to forage in grass. And then the entity that does regulate this claim of pasture raised is Certified Humane. You can see it, I just circled it in yellow on your screen. It's a pretty innocuous little easy to miss label on a package. And then down here at the bottom, you can see that label bigger right there. That's what it looks like. So if this is an important thing to you, that birds are allowed to be outside and foraging and have space, that's a label to look for. And Certified Humane also is a third-party auditor of animal welfare claims in general. Okay, do we have any more egg or animal product related questions? And then I'm going to move on to produce.
We don't yet, Sarah. I dropped the Certified Humane Org website link down in the chat window, though, if anybody wants to check it.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, so we made it through animal products, right? There's so many claims around animal products, and it is really genuinely confusing, and it's complicated. And in some ways, produce is a lot easier to navigate. In other ways, not so much, but in some ways it really is. So these are some of when I go to a farmer's market, these are some of the kinds of claims that I sometimes see on produce. And, and they're things like low spray, no spray, pesticide free, and chemical free, right? I'm sure most of you have probably seen that claim somewhere at some point, right? So in all transparency, I will tell you that over all those years that I was actively farming, that I was a commercial farmer, I spent the vast majority of those years as a certified organic produce farmer. So certified organic vegetables is the world that I existed in for many years. And I can tell you right now, from the perspective of someone who actually made a living for many years as a certified organic farmer, that if I did absolutely nothing to prevent damage to my crops, this is about, the picture that you see on your screen is about what they would look like, right? So certified organic farmers do indeed spray things. They spray things, however, with products that are certified for use on certified organic farms. They are all biologically derived products. So they're derived from things like flowers or oils from trees, or they're biological products that can go in and actually kind of eat. There's actually a bunch of caterpillars. You probably can't see them in here, but there's one right there. There's products like a bacteria that you can release on caterpillar that will go in and kill the caterpillar, right? So certified organic is not synonymous with low spray, no spray, or pesticide free. Certified organic farms do spray things. They just are spraying things that are naturally derived, not synthetically derived. Okay, and I think that's a really important thing to know. So when I see a product that, so if I did nothing on my cabbage crop, for example, in Florida, whatsoever to prevent pests, this is about what it would look like. And I would actually be really lucky if I could get it to look this good by the time it was this big. So I took this picture years ago, and this is a certified organic cabbage, right? This is more what you tend to look at when you are going shopping, right? You would never buy that. That's not a sellable product. So to get to our actual, to really just like the human standards we have in this country, that, like the aesthetic standards of what our food should look like, organic farms do spray things. And there's many other ways that organic farms control pests and diseases as well that don't involve spraying anything, but organic sprays are used. So when somebody is claiming, if I go to a farmer's market and someone is selling a product that looks like this and they're claiming to be no spray, I have to really stop and kind of question a little bit. And because my background is farming, and because of the kind of job that I do, I love talking to people who make those kinds of claims that have produce that doesn't necessarily match what I'm seeing on their claim label. And I just have a really nice conversation with them about, I see you say that you're no spray, but your produce looks beautiful. I'm like, can you tell me some about how you go about getting your produce to look this beautiful? And, and sometimes what I learn is that they're using certified organic products, and they're calling that no spray. So just having a really nice conversation sometimes with a producer to understand more about how they're bringing this beautiful product to market and calling it no spray. If you do go about a conversation like that, just do it nicely. I would give folks the benefit of the doubt. I would give them the benefit of the doubt that they're not trying to pull the wool over your eyes, and really approach it from a place of genuine curiosity, because there's usually a lot to learn, and there's some really neat tricks to the trade where you can do some very, very minimal use of even organic chemicals to control pests. Okay, so I want to show you a handful of other certifications that are starting to take traction in this country, some really neat things that are gaining. So one of them is this certification right here. This is actually just a screenshot from their website, and it's Regenerative Organic Certified. And this is a movement that basically came out of a lot of discontent within the world of organic agriculture, where a lot of folks feel like when the USDA took over and started to regulate what organic means across the country, the soul of organic really got lost, like the whole reason behind why the organic movement started in the first place in this country. And so this certification is a certification that has really kind of been created in response to almost 20 years worth of discontent that some part of the soul of organic has been lost in that process. And this takes a really deep dive into kind of the world of organic. It's a very, very broad dive in that even includes things like the importance of how our farm workers are treated in the process. They've just finished their pilot program, and this September, actually in a few weeks, this certification is being launched for the first time ever. And I know that there are many farmers across our nation that are quite excited about this certification. This is another certification that popped up. I can't actually remember how many years ago, but it was maybe a few years after the USDA started to regulate the word organic in our country. And again, this was also another response to that move of what had once upon a time been a really grassroots food claim over to a very federally regulated food claim. And this certification is called Certified Naturally Grown. There's about 750 members nationwide, 14 in Florida. I happen to be working with a handful of other producers in Florida right now that are in the process of filling out their paperwork, so there may be some more. But this is a really great way for farmers that don't want to start to really muck around with all the federal legislation of USDA certified, but they know that they're growing to those standards and they want their customers to see that in some way, in some trustable way. And so this is a peer reviewed, so it's like a farmer to farmer inspection process. They have to follow all the same rules and regulations as organic certification, but instead of doing all the federal paperwork and federal inspections and things like that, it's a peer-to-peer review process. Kevin, are there any questions about any of that so far?
Not directly related to that, but we did have one come in asking if you could talk about labels for dog food or maybe even other pet foods.
That's a good question. I would love to, but I actually really don't know much at all about how pet foods are regulated. Yeah, so I'm going to not talk about it because I just don't know enough to talk about it accurately. But that's a really good question. I will try to pull some information up, and when I send that email out tomorrow, I'll send you some information about the hows and wheres and whys of pet food regulation in this country. That's a great question. Okay, so there's plenty of other food labels that you might see as well. And I know not all of you on this webinar are from Florida, but I'm going to show you a handful of Florida-specific labels that you may see. The FDAX is the abbreviation for the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. That is basically the Florida version of the USDA. Each state has some equivalents to that. And so the Florida Department of Agriculture has this branding for products that are grown and raised in Florida. And the only way the only thing that a farmer or rancher or some sort of producer has to do to be able to use this label is they pay an annual $50 membership fee, fill out a short application, and then they are given the rights to use this logo. And that just helps customers know that something was actually grown or raised right here in Florida. This is a new brand, this Southwest Florida Fresh, that was launched just a few months ago. And it's a branding effort from the Regional Economic Council that covers the southwest part of Florida, that covers Charlotte, Collier, Glades, Hendry, Lee, and Sarasota counties. I really like the actual brand, like the actual visual of the brand. It's hasn't gained much traction yet. They are in the process right now of recruiting farmers and ranchers and other producers to be a part of this brand and to start using it. But their website is up and going. You can search it. It's a really well constructed website. It just needs more producers to actually join it. This is another label that you might see, and you probably won't see this label actually on food, but you will sometimes see it if you are driving around the rural parts of our state and as well as other states. And it's a sign that you might see outside of some farmland called, and it just says, "This farm cares." The person in the picture that you can see on your screen is actually one of our local ranchers here in Sarasota County, Mr. Chuck Johnston, who owns 2J Farms. And he is one of the 3 Sarasota County producers that have won this very prestigious award for how environmentally sensitively they are going about running their business. How well they're doing actually complying with this really amazing voluntary program through the Florida Department of Agriculture called the Agriculture Best Management Program. And Chuck raises cattle, and the Florida Department of Agriculture's Agriculture Best Management Practices program has a 100-page manual of best management practices for raising cattle. And Chuck is one of those rare souls in our area who has really exemplified that program, as has Longino Ranch. They've actually won some national awards for their environmental sustainability of how they manage their ranch lands. So you may see that little sign sitting on the side of the road next to some farms. And if so, know that they have done a really exemplary job of caring for the land that they're on. So how to find locally produced food. I have lived in other parts of the country where this was really easy. And I moved to Florida about four or 5 years ago. And the first thing I was struck by was that it's actually kind of hard to find really locally produced food. And I love supporting local producers. So when I moved down to the Sarasota area about 2 years ago, I discovered Transition Sarasota, which is a wonderful nonprofit in our area. We collaborate a lot. And one of the things that they do is they produce a local food guide. And they're redoing that section of their website right now. But when it is up and running, all of the bullet point categories that you see on your screen, you can search by those categories and pull up businesses that either produce or sell products in those categories. Transition Sarasota is also a really great way to actually get involved with some local farming efforts. They help connect people directly to farms to do some volunteer work. So that's what I have for you today in terms of presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now, and with these last few minutes, just answer questions. So go for it if you have questions.
Bashful group today.
Yeah, I know, you never know. Sometimes we have so many questions, I end up staying on for an extra hour or more answering questions. And some groups are kind of quiet. So go ahead, Kevin.
Sarah, it might be off topic for this course, but I remember one of the blog posts you had on the different color of eggs. Is that addressed in labeling at all?
That's a great question. Yeah, so eggs, if you've only ever bought eggs at the grocery store, you would think that they come in only white or brown, right? Those are really the only 2 color eggs that you see at the grocery store. But eggs actually come in like a whole rainbow of colors, from like a deep coffee brown through like blushes of pink, greens and blues, tans, khaki. I mean, there is a true beautiful myriad of colors in eggs. And each of those colors simply corresponds to the breed of chicken that they're from. So most of the chickens that we get eggs from in this country are from just a very small handful of breeds, and they've been bred to produce a whole lot of eggs as fast as they can. And when you start getting into lots of different colors of eggs, those tend to be some of those older heritage breed chickens that lay the different color eggs. But you generally don't actually see anything about the color other than white or brown on egg labels. But you actually, egg labels actually do have to state the color of the egg, white or brown. During early on in COVID, there was a variance to egg labels. And one of the things to try to get eggs to grocery stores faster was to actually waive the requirement for printing the color of the egg on the packaging, which I think is kind of funny. And there's absolutely no difference in nutrition, quality, taste, or anything with different color eggs. Other questions, Kevin?
Sure, you have another one that came in. Is fish labeling regulated, such as wild or farmed?
It is, and I actually intended to have a little piece of information about that, and I just didn't pull it together quite fast enough. So I'm going to actually provide you with some really fantastic information on fish labeling and seafood and how to source seafood. Like if you have strong if you really care about where your seafood's coming from and ethical sourcing and things like that, environmentally sensitive sourcing for fish, there's some amazing resources. So I will send those out via email as well.
Okay. We had another one come in on the original forms of food. And it might be easiest if I share the screen image that was sent here, our website, because the question ties to that. From the image provided, how do you identify if the food is in ancient original form, which used to be before GMO around 17th century? So let me share the screen image that was sent our way. Can you see that, Sarah?
Yes. Mm-hmm. I can see it. Okay.
A little bit easier there.
Yeah, so I think okay, so let me back up and try to explain this well. So hybridization is something that happens naturally, right? So basically all of the food that we eat at some point in the history of Earth was in a different form, right? So corn, for example, thousands of years ago looked like any other grass that grows in a field. And over time, humans selected for the biggest grass seeds, and then the biggest grass seeds from that, and then the biggest grass seeds from that. And eventually, over thousands of years, we have selected, walking through our fields, selected the biggest, and then the biggest, and the biggest, and the biggest, and then eventually that switched over also to the sweetest and the sweetest corn. And so that's a process that happened simply by people walking through fields and picking out the biggest and the best over thousands of years. And so that, when we talk about hybrids, plants naturally hybridize. They naturally cross with each other. Grains are pollinated mostly by the wind. So when the wind blows, if there's two different types of grain near each other that are closely enough related, they can cross, and then a new grain comes from that. And that's why we have so many different varieties of foods in the world. And then also we can use our big human brains and all of our technology to speed up that process of hybridizing. So when we talk about varieties that were hybridized by people, so like varieties that we intentionally created, what we're typically talking about are really, really recent varieties. So instead of, just walking through the field and always just picking the biggest and the best, now we know that you can actually literally go with a little paintbrush and swab pollen from one plant that you really like characteristics of and swab it on to another plant that has characteristics that you really like. And then you collect those seeds, you plant those seeds, see what comes from it, and you just keep going from there. So when we talk about hybridizing, that it's either a process that happens naturally through wind or pollinators, or through humans still using the actual natural system of plant reproduction. Genetic modification is just a completely different category. That's when we make actual like physical changes at the genetic level, as opposed to plants just naturally, their genes naturally changing over time as they naturally breed, right? So that's basically that distinction. So if you look at that's great. You can actually see wild corn in one of those pictures. Yeah. Years ago, I was actually lucky enough to go to one of the most phenomenal ethnobotanical gardens I have ever stepped foot in, down in Oaxaca, Mexico. And they actually have a display, like a garden that they maintain, where they've been able to basically find seed and replicate and show you with real living plants the progression of corn from basically a stalk of grass through this thing that we eat today. If you ever get a chance someday to visit Oaxaca, Mexico, down in southern Mexico, go to their city's botanical garden. It will truly blow your mind. And they also show you how that progression has looked for other food products as well. So yeah, things look really, really different over time. Did that more or less answer that question?
It appeared to, yeah. Looks like we've had some more come in the meantime. We'll go back to the eggs here. Is it true that unwashed eggs will last longer unrefrigerated? Not so much labeling, but since we were talking about eggs earlier.
Yes, unwashed eggs will last longer unrefrigerated. In Florida, it is actually not legal to sell unwashed eggs. And what we mean by washed and unwashed is like literally physically washing eggs. Chickens, to get into some anatomical details, chickens have a single output on their rear ends. It's called the cloaca, and it's where both excrement and eggs pass through. So needless to say, it's kind of a messy place for an egg to make its way into the world. And so some eggs will come through smeared with excrement. And so if you, in a lot of regions of the world and in this country, and even when I've had chickens myself in the past, I would just not wash my eggs until right before I would use them, and then I didn't have to refrigerate them. But for food safety purposes, as someone who buys and sells eggs, those eggs do actually have to be washed. They have to be washed and sanitized to make sure that there's no potential of passing chicken poo onto you. And then once an egg is washed, it definitely needs to go in the refrigerator, because part of what you wash off is basically a protective coating that doesn't let bacteria pass through that egg.
Okay. Very delicate, very delicately phrased. I'll give you credit for that one. Yeah. You had another one come in. Looks like the original questioner has left the session here, but we'll ask it anyway. I see distributed in quotes, but not origin of food. How can we know? I guess, is there a way to determine the actual origin of the food?
That's becoming harder and harder. That really is. There's so many. So sometimes you'll see farm names written as, I'm just going to this is a totally made up example, Sunshine Farm, right? Farm singular. But sometimes you'll see a farm name that says Sunshine Farms, plural. Having that S, that plural there, lets you know that there is not a single farm location. So what that often means is that it's a brand name, basically, rather than an individual farm. And under that brand name of Sunshine Farms, multiple farms feed into that brand, right? So if you want to actually make your way back to the origin of where that actual package of whatever it is you're buying came from, you will need to actually contact, sometimes, not always, but sometimes you'll actually need to contact the company, that brand name, and then be able to read them enough information from your packaging that they can go back through their traceability process and tell you exactly where it came from. And because of food safety, and now food safety is becoming an increasingly regulated thing in this country, It's actually now, with very few exceptions, pretty much all farms in the country now have to be able to trace back to an actual field where whatever that thing is that you purchased came from, right? So if I was selling eggplant and that eggplant went to a distributor, and then the distributor sold it to a processor, and then the processor turned it into, I don't know, eggplant parm, and then sold that. There is now a way to trace back that eggplant parm, that eggplant in that eggplant parm in that particular package, all the way back to my field. So it is possible. You may have to do some convincing to try to figure out exactly where something came from, but it is totally possible.
Okay. And I misspoke here. The questioner is still in the conversation. That was from Pat. You can see there. I did have a follow-up for you, one from me, if you bear with me here. You mentioned how COVID had, the pandemic had affected the labeling issues for eggs. Are there other examples where a pandemic, this one in particular, might be affecting labels that we see out there?
I think there was one other egg related variance. It was actually on the size of eggs. The size of eggs are regulated also by the government into 5 different size categories. And so that was, and you can only have one size egg in a package. And another variance was that you could have multiple sized eggs in one package for a stretch of time. But as far as I am aware, I don't think there's anything else that has changed in terms of labeling due to COVID.
Okay. And then we have one more that I can see here, kind of a follow-up on the genetic hybridization discussion. Is there any book that you can suggest to get more information about the original food structures?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Let me dig around a little bit. I know that there are, and I know that I don't have recent info in mind. So let me dig around some, and I can send that information out as well.
Okay. And we'll have the emails addresses for the folks who've registered here, so we can get in touch with them with follow-up information.
Exactly. And I see that Janet raised her hand, and you're totally welcome to unmute yourself if you want to go that route, Janet. Did you know that you raised your hand?
Yes, I did know. Yes. I'm sorry. I just couldn't find the other thing. Is most corn in the U.S. Genetically modified corn?
You know, I don't actually know the answer to that. I know that a lot of corn is, but I don't know what the percentage currently is, and I'm not even sure if it is known what the current percentage of acreage of genetically modified corn is in this country right now.
Oh, do you know if there are any health cases of resulting from a genetically modified diet?
I don't, and it's one that this is an incredibly contentious topic. I'm sure you are aware of that. Yeah. And there's a lot of information that falls on both sides of things. And so I think that there's still just so much to learn. And that's, it's one of the things that keeps life interesting for sure. But yep, I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We had another one come in, Sarah. Is it true that nature doesn't produce gluten, that it's only from man-made foods? That's a little more of the chemistry side of things than labeling, but since we're here.
Yeah, no, gluten exists naturally in a lot of grass, the seeds of grasses. That's where gluten tends to come from. Yeah. And so we don't usually eat the seeds of grasses, like wheat or rye or, things like that, without processing it first. We don't usually just cook up a pot full of wheat seeds, although you can. Wheat berries are what they're called. So I think that's often where that kind of gray area comes in, is that the form that we eat gluten in comes from process. We eat it in a processed form, but it's not there because we processed it. It was already there.
Okay. And does eating soy cause anemia?
Oh, I have no idea. That's a great question. I'll send that question to our Family and Consumer Sciences agent in our office, and she may have some information on that she can share. I'm not sure.
Okay. This one wasn't directly asked, but as we're kind of wrapping up here, I'll ask it as a wrap up.
Yes.
My takeaway from this was that the labeling is difficult, very difficult. And that you have to look really carefully. Is that correct?
It is, yeah. And so here's the thing: if if you feel strongly about food choices, then yes, you absolutely do need to look really closely at labels and packages and claims. And there's plenty of folks that they eat food, and that's good enough. And then there's plenty of people that for one reason or another need to or feel compelled to know what it is that they're putting in their bodies, and the choices that they're making and how those choices may have other impacts. And so, if you are one of those people for, health reasons or dietary reasons or environmental reasons or any reason at all, then delving in and trying to understand those labels on your food takes some time and some effort, and some really close looking. So, and if you ever need help figuring out what a label claim means, you're absolutely welcome to send it my way. And if I don't know, there's plenty of folks that I can reach out to help me understand where that claim came from and what it might mean. So, where can we find you? Kevin, can you help folks figure out where they can find more information from our extension office? Yeah, and there's my email address as well. Thank you. So with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you for my goodness, what's the word? Apparently I just hit a wall. Been talking for too long. Thank you so much for attending today's webinar, and thank you so much for all the truly fantastic questions. This is a topic that absolutely is confusing, and so I'm really happy that y'all decided to dive in and spend some time learning a bit more about it. And truly do reach out anytime. And I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you are leaving this webinar less confused than you started about food labels. That was my goal today. So thank you all so very much, and I hope the rest of your day is a beautiful one.